An attempt to create reasonable doubt. This is the Daniel Natal Show. I was reading Principia Ethica by G.E. Moore from 1903. The philosopher who wrote it made a very interesting point that in a materialistic age, psychology replaces ethics. Moore wrote, "This method consists in substituting for good some one property of a natural object or of a collection of natural objects, and in thus replacing ethics by some one of the natural sciences. In general, the science thus substituted is one of the sciences specially concerned with man, owing to the general mistake, for such I hold it to be, of regarding the matter of ethics as confined to human conduct. In general, psychology has been the science substituted, as by J.S. Mill, or sociology, as by Professor Clifford and other modern writers. But any other science might equally well be substituted. It is the same fallacy which is implied when Professor Tyndall recommends us to conform to the laws of matter, and here the science which is proposed to substitute for ethics is simply physics." Moore was worried that after the Industrial Revolution, we started to think of human beings in a deterministic way, as if they were machines, and not flesh and blood organisms with souls. There was suddenly a fetish for science, as novelist Joseph Conrad said. They felt it imparted an air of respectability or credibility. So as regards ethics, Moore wrote psychology has been the science substituted for it. I never thought about it that way, but think about it for a second. The new morality today sounds like fake psychology, with Greek terms from psychology thrown in, with social justice warriors calling people homophobes or xenophobes. They want to stand in as fake psychologists diagnosing you without a degree, making up fake mental conditions that are not recognized by the American Psychological Association. Search their clinical handbook in vain for the term homophobia. It doesn't exist. Yet robots from the hive mind, people who couldn't pass the Turing test for consciousness, are inflicting these fake psychological diagnoses on the public as if they have any validity. By the way, this was the control mechanism of the old Soviet Union, where they would lock up dissidents in mental homes under fake psychiatric diagnoses made by politicians instead of by clinicians. According to ethicist Alistair McIntyre in his book, After Virtue, Marxism's moral defects and failures arise from the extent to which it, like liberal individualism, embodies the ethos of the distinctly modern and modernizing world. So it's no accident that Bolshevik figures like Leon Trotsky were exponents of this methodology of substituting fake psychology for ethics. When the Ukraine didn't want to allow the Soviet Union to invade them in the 1920s, Trotsky came up with a novel concept of accusing them of this new mental condition he called racism. They weren't being rational, he claimed. They were only keeping the Bolsheviks out because they were mean-spirited and xenophobic. Up until Trotsky, the term racism was used in a very different sense. Just to put it in context, racism is a very new word. It was unknown before around 1900. It does not appear in the first dictionary of the English language by Samuel Johnson in 1755. Chaucer never heard of the word, nor Shakespeare, nor Abraham Lincoln. It doesn't appear in the works of Herman Melville, Edith Wharton, Mark Twain, Jack London, and so forth. If you jumped into a time machine and met George Washington and asked him about racism, he would have had no idea what you were talking about. When it was coined around 1900, the word merely meant the study of races and corresponded to today what we call physical anthropology or human biodiversity. Scientific racism, as it was first known, was taught at Harvard, Yale, the Sorbonne, Oxford, and so forth. Eminent anthropologists in the field like Franz Boas taught it. Just as the term biologist doesn't connote someone who hates biology but someone who studies it, or a geologist doesn't hate geology but studies the earth, so a racist circa 1900 was someone who studied races, not someone who hated other races. The first usage of the second definition of racism, meaning the hatred of races, the definition that we use today, came from Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution in 1929. And the first so-called racists, or rasisti according to Trotsky, were the Ukrainians, who out of small-minded pettiness wouldn't let the Soviets into their territory. Of course, once the Ukrainians stopped being this thing that Trotsky called racist and let the Soviets in, they murdered between 6 to 9 million Ukrainians. So Trotsky's framing of their self-defense as mental illness was akin to a burglar trying to convince you that locking your door at night is immoral. An object lesson, and not getting your ethics from a mass murder. It's as ludicrous as getting your moral code from serial killer Ted Bundy. Although to be fair, Trotsky killed far, far more people than Ted Bundy. And yet it's the moral code of this pseudo-psychologist that we use today. His fake psychiatric designations are still being utilized as a template for framing totalitarianism as a form of healthcare, a sort of medical martial law that might be familiar to people looking out over the world today. Tyranny that no free people would ever accept if it came in the form of communism, they accept when it comes in a white lab coat from a non-doctor. But this is more than just an indictment of Trotskyite techniques than it is, as G.E. Moore pointed out, a charge leveled at the wider phenomenon of psychology replacing ethics in a materialistic age. Participants who used the New American Magazine reported that they experienced 12% more muscle mass, 22% more smiles from attractive strangers, and a 72% reduction in cognitive decline. Check us out at thenewamerican.com.